Okay, well, welcome everybody. I want to make sure that you're in the right place. So if you are here to find out how to get into your media spotlight, you've made it. And the official title is Get Your Name in the News in 54 Days or Less, but you can call it anything you like. So first off, I would ask if you could just mute yourself. Take a look in the bottom left. I'll try and keep an eye on that, but just in case, I can't mute at the same time as I'm talking. Maybe you can just look after that. Also, turn off distractions. Make sure the cell phone is out of the way and you've turned away from Facebook and email, because I will be giving you very actionable items today to take away, to work on, to ask questions about. And in fact, just from today, you could probably start to sit down to write media pitches to access media coverage. So give yourself, some time, so relax and enjoy it. And, let me know in the chat box if I'm going too fast or too slowly. If it's too hot or too cold, I'm sorry, I can't do anything about it from here. You'll have to take care of that. So let's jump right into it. A little bit about me. So first off, I have a background that spans more than 20 years in the industry, and I've worked in radio and television and newspapers. And most recently in Vancouver, I was features editor at Business in Vancouver, which is published by Glacier Media. Glacier Media also publishes a number of magazines and other types of publications, which I edited at one point or another. Also have been an associate producer for CBC Television News in Montreal, and radio and current affairs, and pretty much anything you could sort of do around a broadcast station, I've done it. And at the bottom there, you can see a list of the special sections that I edited. So I've had my hand not just in a variety of media, but in pretty much every topic that you can think of. And so I was essentially the person who got the pitches. If people wanted to be in the newspaper or on radio, I got the request and basically had to vet it and decide whether or not the story was valuable. So this is kind of what started me off. This was one of the pitches that I received. This is back in 2013. I was at Business Vancouver. And as you can see, it's just a lot of text. It's a headline and a lot of text. And this was sent by an entrepreneur who was putting on some presentations for sales training. And he had people who went onto the Dragon's Den come in and help out. And so, when I got this, I thought, my God, this is not something that I want to read and go through. And it's not something where I could see the story very clearly. It's not easy to read. There's not a lot of white space. And I felt really bad for this guy. I knew him. He was a stand-up guy and a very hardworking entrepreneur. And I just thought maybe I would give him some help, because I figured, why should an entrepreneur necessarily know how to write a press release? It's not like we're taught it in high school. And normally when you go and do business courses, they don't include media outreach courses as part of communications and marketing, but they should. So I took a look at this and I said to him, listen, I'm going to use this as a bad example when I do classes in the future, if you let me rewrite it. And I did that for him, and he ended up using it for the rewritten piece for other media outlets that he pitched to. And in fact, I have the revised version in a Dropbox. If you want to see it at some point, I can show it to you. But right now, I just wanted to make the point that I totally get the fact that a lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs really don't have a foothold in media outreach. They don't know where to start. It's not intuitive. It's for a long time been the realm of PR agencies. And so a lot of time people stay away from it and think that, it's not for me. I'm not supposed to do it. I'm here to debunk all of that, because if you can send an email, if you can do research on the web, if you can pick up a phone, you can do media outreach. Really, really, really. I mean, when I started, it was just like anybody else. Where do I go? What do I do? How do I make my first link with an editor or producer? And it didn't take long until you figure out the game. So I want to remind people as well that if you stay till the end, I will be offering this bonus gift. This is actually a series of 7 short videos, 10 to 15 minutes each, that goes through step-by-step how to actually write the media pitch or press release. So we're not going to get into detail because it does in the webinar today, because it does take a while. So this will give you an opportunity to go through it at your own pace, and because it's only 10 to 15 minutes, they're very short and very easy to consume. I'll also be telling you about the system that I've developed, which is the Media Mastery System, and it is the only one of its kind in Canada. The 5-step program enables people to go from, I don't know what I'm doing, to, hey, I just got a call from a radio producer and they want to interview me. This is pretty cool. So I'll be telling you about that also at the end. And I just wanted to remind people, I don't know if you saw this in some of the announcements, I'm not selling anything in the webinar today. You won't even, I'm not pitching for you to buy anything today. I want you to just get an idea of what this kind of coursework or this kind of step-by-step can do for you, and see if we might be a match. So why don't we get started? How about if we start with the chat box and just mark down, what your business is, what you do, maybe just the industry or something about your goal maybe in media, and where you're out in your media outreach. So for those who are on the webinar call today, you can just type it into the chat box. And I do have some people who had called in by phone, so you can send me a text message about that. I've spoken to Mimi already, and Mimi has told me that her business industry is in nutrition. Health and nutrition, I guess, because you've actually working kind of holistically in order to heal the body. Valentina, what do you do? Where is your, Valentina's hiding under her sofa. Okay, thank you for telling me that. And what do you do? What is your business? And by the way, no matter where you are at in your media outreach, you can drop into these kind of programs anytime, any point, because there's always going to be information for you to get from it. So whether you've already tried to reach out, or and you've gotten no results, or you've gotten some, you want more, whatever industry you're in, whatever stage you're at, this is fine. You'll get something out of the webinar today. So if you could just mark in the chat box, it really helps me as well, because later on when I get to specific areas where I give examples, I always try to relate them to the industries of people who are on the call today. So for instance, if I'll use nutrition as an example for Story Media might be interested as I run through the presentation today. So yeah, just mark down if you can what area you're in. Online advertising, small business for chapter. Oh, hi, Graham. Brilliant. Entrepreneur Pascal Pillion to launch Droplet, a startup based in designing and making teardrop campers. Oh, I've seen those, the teardrop campers. Yeah, that's very cool. We just launched pre-sales. I outreached real magazines in the past for people with moderate success. John, the ghost tour. Very cool. Okay, so I'm gonna, if you could post in the chat. Okay, and I have just lost my mouse. Here we go. Okay, somebody was raising their hand, so I'm just saying if you could post in the chat, that would be better. All right, so for a moment, what I want you to do, whoops, is if you can imagine, maybe just close your eyes for a moment and imagine, like relax, sit back, we'll just do this for a couple of minutes. We're not going to do this, for a long time. But I want you to sit back, take a breath, And imagine what would happen if the phone rang and it's a producer of a television show that wants you on as a guest. Or maybe it's the editor of a national magazine or newspaper and they want to do a profile on you. And they want to put you on the cover or the homepage of their site. Either way, I want you to imagine you've been contacted by somebody giving you an opportunity to be seen by 50,000 people. And they're targeted. These are not just random individuals. These are all people who would be interested in your product. So I want you to imagine what would happen if this came to pass. Get detailed, specific. Does your phone start ringing in the afternoon once you've been on air? Start to think of what it is you actually want to achieve by getting this publicity. For some people, they might just want the phone to ring off the hook and get sales. For some people, they just want to be able to put those logos right up on their website. So this is an interesting story I'll just tell you about. This person had an article written online. You know, it's funny when I talk about articles in magazines, everybody just assumes it's only print publication, but pretty much everything I talk about is online as well. So, and some magazines are just online. So, you know, gone are the days where you have to wait 6 months necessarily for publication, and gone are the days where you can't track if somebody has clicked from an article onto your website. So this guy, Neil Belenky, was in a magazine online, and his article happened to be seen by the business manager for Jacques Cousteau's son. They reached out to him, and as a result, they became known through the Cousteaus, who were brand ambassadors and shareholders in his company. And the involvement grew the company by $2 million. This is not something he necessarily envisioned, but something that came about because he pursued media coverage regularly. So again, I want you to think and be specific again. What happens the day your TV show airs? What happens when the magazine hits the stand or the link shows up in subscribers' email? I want you to think of what this would mean for you to get this kind of publicity. And I'd like you to put it in the chat box so I can get a sense of what people are looking for out of the media coverage. As I said, some people are just looking for leads. They want direct sales. They want people to call them. Other people just want the credibility that comes with being an independent media. So let's talk a little bit about what media can do for you. And this is quite relevant because I think a lot of people just assume one thing or another. And I want you to start to imagine a lot of different types of opportunities that can come out of media. This is important because it will help inform the strategy that you take. If you just want the big logos to go on your site, then your strategy is going to be going after those big logo companies. If you actually want distribution, you want people in the geographic area you live in to see you, then you're going to have a different strategy. So increased credibility is one thing that media has, that traditional media has, that social media doesn't. So it enables an independent outlet to say that you are the expert, your product is the best. You're the one people should turn to. You're so important. We did a profile of you. We put you on the cover. Referrals, inquiries, leads, and sales. Yes, 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 and yes. So out of writing a column, my clients have people essentially read the column and email them right afterwards. They see how their need can be fulfilled by what my client has to offer, and they can only see that because my client was in the newspaper. So direct leads, direct inquiries, and also media feeding on Excel. This is something a lot of people actually are unaware of, and that is a lot of bigger media read small media publications. So when I used to work at CBC, in the morning on the news show, I would constantly be looking at smaller community publications, ethnic publications, geographically based publications, because there were often very interesting stories and profiles of people in there that you wouldn't necessarily see in other media. And that would enable me to get story ideas and fresh interviews. So if you're thinking, well, maybe it's a waste of time to be in smaller media, think again. Very often it's a lot easier to get into smaller podcasts, smaller radio station, smaller TV show, and from there use it as a stepping stone into bigger media. So it looks like a lot of people are interested in increased credibility and recognition. Yeah, very good. And Valentina wants the phone ringing off the hook. All right, so this is what I was talking about with regard to those logos. So this type of impression and what it makes when somebody lands on your website it's just not comparable to anything else. I want you to imagine if you replaced all of those with social media logos, like, as seen on Facebook or as seen on LinkedIn, or, a regular contributor to Instagram. Just, of course, it seems ridiculous, because this basically demonstrates that you have this independent credibility that has been legitimized by a third party. This is a great quote. I love it from one of my clients, Barry Sampson. We'll talk about him a little bit more later. He says, he was no more of an expert than I was before I did the interviews on CBC and Roundhouse Radio, but suddenly I'm credible. So Barry had an event that happened around Christmas time last year, and he worked with me to get interviews on North by Northwest and the TV show Our Vancouver with Gloria Makarenko. It was a great response from media. And then there's leverage. This is something you need to know as well, because understanding where your media goes, who's watching, who's reading, how many people are there. Are you going for volume, or are you going for a certain quality of media outlets? So for instance, Business in Vancouver has a lower number of readers, but they're all highly targeted decision makers in business. So if you're a business to business industry, which I'm just looking, and I don't know, maybe Graham, I guess, is a business to business industry. So for business to business industries, you'd want to focus on Business in Vancouver because they're so targeted. On the left, that's Vitamin, well, it used to be Vitamin Daily. I call it Vitamin Daily still. It's now Vita Magazine. So that is an online and in-print magazine. It's lifestyle, it's travel and clothing and fashion, all that kind of thing. It's health as well. And so if you're business to consumer, you would want to be in Vita. But Vita is a little bit more spread out. You may not be as targeted, but you do have a higher number of subscribers. So it's always that good comparison. Are you going for target? Or are you going for numbers? Here's a really good example of leverage. Leverage, by the way, is one of the most important things you can do in marketing. If you can leverage the resources of another individual or company, if you can leverage the marketing that's already been done by a newspaper or magazine, if you can leverage the outreach that already exists in a media outlet simply by writing an email, doesn't that make more sense than spending hours and hours and hours on your own social media platforms trying to build them a few likes at a time or a few dozen followers at a time? So Aisha came to me. She was working with Mentorship BC and wanted to get some publicity for the program. And so we sourced essentially 5 different local business, not business publications necessarily, but media outlets interested in business. And this was one. This was for BC Business. And essentially sent out 5 emails and got a response back right away from BC Business for this page called Do It Yourself Management. This is edited by an associate editor who interviewed Aisha and then wrote it up kind of like a story. And she got in front of 100,000 readers, and they're all business readers. So, I could probably 7 out of every 10 people who come to me who are business to business, I can get onto this page for them. I can easily have them identify the kind of story BC Business would be interested in, and show them how to write a press release or a media pitch that would get to the right person. And I can tell them who the right person is. So there you go. So let's take a look at what media looks for in a story, the story checklist. And by the way, if you have stepped away from your computer, or you've gone to get a coffee, or you're looking at Facebook, or you're taking notes somewhere else, I would suggest you come back now, because now we're going to really hit the 7, or maybe it's 8, I can't remember what I left it at, criteria for getting into a story. So the story checklist is something that I've developed over the years of being behind the scenes as the recipient of most of the media pitches that I've been talking about. So here we go. Number 1 is going to be expertise about a specific service or product. So this is pretty much the first place people go to. If you have the new product like the Teardrop Camper, or if you have an expertise you've developed like the nutrition and health, if you have a kind of, I guess, Ghost Tour would be sort of a combined service and product, I would say. So your expertise about that particular product or industry is the number 1 area that you will go to identify whether there's a story or not. And usually you look at it and say, okay, well, what's interesting about what I do? What's compelling? What would make people stop and listen if they were flicking channels and heard this on a news variety show? Think about what really gets people interested in what you do and raises their eyebrows. Then you have expertise about or learn lessons from operations. So this is one of the most overlooked areas on how to get a story idea into a media outlet. And this is very often the case if people have a business to consumer product. So let's say your Teardrop Camper. So great, that's a product. You want to sell it to people, to families, to campers, or whoever. But wait a second, what did you learn building your business? What did you learn about raising money? What did you learn about getting the materials? What did you learn about building a prototype? You know, these are all fabulous questions. If you could write a column that answers one of those questions, like 7 steps to building a prototype. Seriously, I've actually built a prototype office product, and I know that I can outline in 7 or 10 steps the big chunks that you have to do in order to go from concept to production. Now, of course, that's very simplified, but it could be something that might be worthy of a column, like an advice column for Business of Vancouver, or the do-it-yourself column for BC Business. Why not? I doubt anybody has written in the BC Business column, 7 steps on how to make a prototype. But hopefully you get the idea that you have learned things simply by building your business. And I think it was Aurelian who was in their Teardrop. If it is, Aurelian, maybe you can just answer, yes or no. Do you think you have, if somebody came to you and said, I'd like an advice column and it has to do with business operations, would you be able to write one? Do you hire contractors? What have you learned about hiring contractors? Ghost Tour, do you need special permits to do what you do? How do you deal with inclement weather? There's so many different things that you need to deal with that you can teach other people, other business owners. And that's relevant for business publication. An event. Event is always great. Events are timely. They're easy to write up as a press release. You can hone in on some very interesting emotional topics in events, connect them to charities that are in the news, charities that are trending. If you don't have an event, then create an event. It's really not hard to find a charity in the Lower Mainland who would be very interested in having you host some sort of fundraiser and have them show up as the recipient of the big check at the end of the evening. So all you have to do is come up with a fun evening for a fundraiser. You know, you take what you need to cover the cost, and all the other money goes to the charity. Now, depending on how interesting the fundraiser is, that could be a really great story that media would pick up on. And you could have a lot of fun doing it. And it raises your brand recognition. And it does something great for a charity. And especially, you know, as I mentioned, if it's something that's been in the news. So if it has anything to do maybe with, you know, refugees, or if it has anything to do with bullying, or, you know, something where you can raise awareness and raise money at the same time, media really likes that. And it's very important to know if you have something that's very timely. So, hey, it's happening on this and this date. Media pays more attention because they know that if they ignore it for too long, it's going to be an old story. So around events, you need to know, do you want somebody to cover it beforehand? Do you want them to show up? Do you want them to cover it afterwards? These are things that you have to take into account, but it's really a great starting point to get your name in the news. Is there anything that's new or changing in your field? So this could be in the form of legislation very often, or new materials being used. So Mimi, maybe you've discovered certain types of practices in nutrition that has made a difference from maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Who was I talking to earlier? On the ghost tour, have there been changes in terms of, I mentioned earlier, do you need permits? Has there been any change in terms of the permits that you need to take people around? I'm assuming, by the way, this is like a walking ghost tour. I think I've actually covered it once before. But if there's anything that's very different, you might know about it and media doesn't know about it. So you want to use that opportunity to educate media, and therefore you come across as the expert and you give them a reason to do a story. Liquor laws, marijuana legislation, of course. If you're in any area of customer resource management, then the anti-spam legislation that came in generated hundreds and hundreds of stories because people didn't know what was going on. So anything like that that's changing is a really great focus for a story. Is there a trend, whether it's news or cultural or celebritainment, that a lot of people always love? So I was working with one client who did a fitness course where she used a trampoline. And so one of the first things I did is I said, go find out which celebrities are using trampolines. We're going to use that as a hook for the story. We're going to say, this is a new trend. Look, it's starting in Hollywood, trampolines. This is the best way to keep fit. And then we'll bring you in, and you're the only people here that'll do it. So people always stop and pay attention when you tell them the celebrities are doing something. It's, you know, it's, it kind of takes advantage of a kind of funny situation, but if you can draw attention by, you know, using big names, dropping big names, then why not? Geographic or demographic relevance, overlooked again. Do you have any type of ethnicity background? I used to be the editor of the Jewish Independent newspaper in Vancouver, and pretty much your, you know, if you had a somewhat interesting background or story or product and you were Jewish, you got answered. At a minimum, we would talk to you and do some research to see what it's all about, but you definitely got your email answered. So if you have a certain ethnic background that connects to a media outlet, play it up. If you live in a certain area, again, I used to edit a section for Business Vancouver that focused on Surrey businesses. And pretty much, you know, every quarter I needed to fill a certain amount of space with stories just about Surrey business. So if anybody emailed me and said, hey, I'm a business in Surrey, like if they put that in the subject line, I'm a business in Surrey, I would open their email automatically. Automatically. I wouldn't even care what the business was. I would just open it. Is there some really weird niche or quirky offering? This is where your product or service doesn't really fall under any particular category, but it's just so unique. So one friend of mine actually has a business called Under the Piano. And what he does, he's a pianist, a wonderful improv pianist, and he has people lie on cushions underneath his piano. And he kind of senses their mood and improvs music. He does this thing for like an hour, and he improvs 5 or 6 pieces. I mean, it's just so amazingly different. So it's, in a way, sometimes it's hard to qualify like where this goes, and sometimes people just jump on it because it's so unique. So there's positive and negative to that. And finally, for any story, is it possible to have a timely relevance? Is there a way for you to put a limit in the amount of time people are going to think about your story as opposed to act on it? So that's just something to consider in each time when you're reaching out to media. Either connect your story to a trend, connect it to an event, connect it to a change, connect it to something that will grow old over time, and that gives media more of a reason to say yes to you now. So what I want to do, just go over quickly some of the key players in case you're, unaware of who does what. If you're pitching to magazines and newspapers, whether they're print or online, you'll be generally pitching to an editor or associate editor. If you're pitching to broadcast, that would be television, radio, podcasts, you would be pitching to a producer. In the case of a podcast, that might also be a host. So you could have a producer for a bigger podcast, like a radio show might have a producer. Normally, though, you just have a host. For a website, you would be aiming for the online publisher. For any of those, magazines, newspapers, radio, website, television, you could contact a journalist who works at that particular media outlet. And if you're dealing with a TV or radio show or podcast, you could also contact the host. Generally, hosts on TV shows and radio don't like to get the direct contact. It's okay if you know them as a friend, not as a distant acquaintance. Podcasts, on the other hand, hosts are the ones that usually receive the material. Big challenge, though. Here's the big problem. We are so busy. Editors, producers, publishers are receiving up to 300 emails a day, of which 70% are just email pitches, which means you're competing just in the inbox. They haven't even gotten to the content of your email. You have to actually consider, if somebody is just scanning through a whole list of email, what are they going to see in your subject line? That's what's going to make you stand out. So where do you start? So first, you want to know what is going to benefit you best in terms of highlighting what you do. So ghost tour, hey, get the camera guys, get them down on the tour. You can talk about it in radio, that's fun. You can have an interview, but nothing is going to highlight what you do as well as having a camera person going through the tour with you. If you have any kind of visuals, like you're in fashion or you're doing home decor, stay away from the radio and newspapers, okay, but podcasts, you can certainly give tips and so on radio and podcasts, but ideally you want to get the benefit of the visuals. So you're focusing on magazines, online, websites, anything that would give you visual benefits and highlight what you do that way. Best chance to start. So I mentioned earlier that if you start aiming at smaller steps, like smaller magazines, smaller podcasts, smaller radio shows, you have a better chance of getting in because there's less competition. That doesn't mean that you don't or you couldn't send media pitches out to the larger networks and newscasts and shows and magazines. That's fine. But don't ignore the smaller ones, because often your first responses of yes will come from those. And once you can get those up on your website, build a media page, highlight all the places that you've been, even if they're small, people begin to see you as credible. Just like what Barry said in that slide earlier on, he didn't have any different knowledge before or after doing the interviews, but he was just seen as more credible. Treat the media like a client. So a lot of people just say, hey, this is what I do. Here you go. Here's the story. Go write about it. You should be interested in it. And they don't take the time to ask the question to the media, what do you need? So if you have a client, the first question you would ask, what do you need? Whoever was doing the Teardrop Camper, you had an idea of some starting point, but you probably did a lot of market research and asked the question, what do you need on a Teardrop Camper? So in order to be able to find out what your client or the media needs, listen to their shows, watch their shows, listen to the podcasts. If you want to be on television, don't come to me and say you don't own a television. I'm really sorry, but the best I can do for you is put you on a broadcast list with like 1,000 media outlets. If you want to do a custom email that's going to get really high response, you need to have some respect for the media outlet. So I would get media pitches to Business of Vancouver, where in the content of the email, it was clear they thought we were BC Business. They didn't even bother to change the email or to double check who they were emailing. So that person, got tossed, and I probably won't open his email again. So treat media like a client, do some research, read the newspaper, watch the TV show, and use editorial calendars. So I mentioned in some of the marketing leading up to this that I was going to show people how to see into the future. So this is where we get to the point where we're seeing into the future. And you want to be able to see into the future so that you can anticipate a media outlet's needs ahead of time and pitch the decision maker in such a way that you are answering or fulfilling on their need. Again, treat them like a client. Find out what their needs are, fulfill on their needs. Do this with editorial calendars. So this is an example of an editorial calendar. This is from Vita Magazine. I couldn't tell you if it's this year or last year, but every year, the beginning of the year, magazines, sometimes newspapers, but mostly magazines, weekly publications, business publications will put together a list of special sections or special magazine topics that they will do for the entire year. So this, what you see on screen, is the November and December issue of Vita Magazine showing some of the specialty departments they're going to have. As expected in Holiday Bling, you have gift guides, holiday-themed recipes, tips for entertaining, and do-it-yourself decor. So, you know what? If you were in the area of home decor, interior design, you could probably pitch maybe an advice column. The 10 ways to design your holiday living room or something, I don't know, or 10 tips on your holiday table that won't exhaust you. Whatever, but knowing ahead of time that this is what they're looking for increases your chances of actually getting into their publication. Another example here is on the business side, and this is a type of content planner that pretty much every small area business publication around North America has. Every one. They all have lists and they all have special focus sections. So these focus sections, I don't know if you would remember, but on that slide near the beginning, these are the ones that I edited when I was at Business of Vancouver. So if I'm trying to fill a section, so if you could see here coming up in May 22nd, there's a small business section. So whoever's editing that week's issue is going to be looking for stories that deal with small business. They could be topical, they could be advice columns, they could be events, they could be all sorts of things. But by knowing ahead of time that this is coming up, you know that the editor's looking for this. So that means in your subject line, you can put small business story for January 22nd. That shows that you know exactly what's going on in the paper. You've taken the time and the trouble to research it. And I'm telling you, if that person is interested in filling their section, they're going to open up that email right away. So where do you find these content planners? They are usually under a tab for the advertising link. So they're put together by the sales department and the editorial and marketing departments, creating the kind of inside sections or specialty magazines that are going to be interesting for sales, so to attract advertisers, and have great editorial stories. Each website I've been to has been a bit different in terms of where you find it. So I can tell you, for example, on Business Vancouver, if you go under the advertise button, it's right there. But usually I click around, maybe I'll spend 10 minutes finding these kind of editorial calendars. And sometimes if you don't find it, just email the advertising department, because they're the ones that would be in on the creation. If one is created, not every magazine and newspaper has one. If they are created, the advertising department would know about it. They can tell you where to find it, and they can tell you when it's coming out. It's one of the most invaluable things you can use, and it is so underused by people. They don't know it exists. So now you've decided where you want to go, and you see the editorial calendar, you've looked ahead of time, you've done your, time travel. What are you going to put in an email? Again, here are the criteria. 1, we want to know who you are and the problem you help solve. You'll notice the word why is nowhere to be seen unless the why is crucial to what you do in your story. In other words, I couldn't possibly buy your product unless I knew why. Then leave it out. 9 times out of 10, it's not relevant to the first line of the email. I want to know, what's the context of this story? The teardrop camper person, why don't you take this on? What's the problem you solve? Why did you decide that there needed to be a new style of camper? This is not just about a small solution. We're trying to find the biggest solution or the biggest problem that you're solving. So a really good example, I have a fitness studio I worked with, and they were rebranding and they were reopening and offering different services. So they were offering like meditation and life coaching and nutrition in addition to fitness. And so they thought the story was like, everything under one roof, isn't this great? And I said, well, no, that's not the story. That's your story. But why did you come up with this? What is the bigger context? So here's where you get to the why, to find out what the bigger context is. So I'm just going to read this. So Aurélien said, we didn't find in the market what we wanted. We created one. We rented summer last year to gather data and experience from first-time users. There you go. What are your credibility factors? So why do I believe you? In the case of a product that's created, I believe you because you've created the product and you've done your research. I may not believe that everybody likes it, but if you could prove to me that your market research demonstrates, yes, this is viable, then I'll believe that it's a good product. In some cases, I need to see numbers. In some cases, I don't. Sometimes things are just interesting in and of themselves. But in any case, if you're dealing with an area like a service, what is the education or experience or testimonials that you can bring to the email? Then I want to know, what can you speak to? What is it that you actually want me to do? Do you want to write a column and you want me to run an advice column? Or do you want to do an interview? In some cases, people feel a lot more comfortable just doing interviews on the phone or even going down to a studio instead of writing. In other cases, people might have a strong accent, they'd prefer to write, and they don't want to necessarily be interviewed. In either case, you want to let the media outlet know what is it you're looking for and what are some of the topics that they can consider. So for example, maybe you have a story idea about, well, in the case of Mimi, she was talking about nutrition. So where is nutrition now when it comes to dealing with the heavier diseases like cancer? Are people believing in it? Do people turn to it? Where does it sit? Give us a snapshot of where it sits. So that could be a really interesting topic where Mimi becomes interviewed as one person amongst several. On the other hand, maybe Mimi wants to write a column that would be, 5 things that you should not include in your diet. We've seen that everywhere, right? 5 things you shouldn't include in your diet if you want to give yourself the best chance of avoiding cancer. I don't know if Mimi can say that. But anyway, you get the idea. Are you doing a column? Are you doing a story? Again, so the topics that would make a good story, I just spoke about 3 and 4 together. So in terms of number 3, it's really about what is your knowledge? What can you speak to? This would be in the case if you were brought into a radio station and interviewed one-to-one, or if somebody asked you to write a column. Number 4, the topics you're giving are if somebody is going to write a story and include you as an interview, as well as 2 or 3 other people in the story. Why should the audience care? You know what? I tell people to write this question in the email and to phrase it like this: why your audience will care. Write that down. Why your audience will care. Put that in an email when you have a media pitch. That will draw the editor or producer's attention, and they'll make me think, hey, you know what? This person has given some thought into this. They're not just trying to pitch themselves and sell their product and service. They actually care about what my audience thinks about and what they want to see and hear. And if you cannot come up with an answer to this question, then you don't have a story. If you can't tell me why this media outlet's audience should care about what you have to say, then the decision maker is not going to care what you have to say. Leverage. Okay, so you've reached out, you've gotten the coverage, you're in radio or you're in television or whatever. Or maybe you've sent out your emails, you've sent out your media outreach. What happens? All right, so somebody contacts you and says, hey, we'd love to do an interview with you on a podcast or radio or TV. Ask them beforehand how you can get your own recording. You do not want to be chasing them afterwards, because they're going to be going on to the next story and they're not going to care about you because they don't have time. If you remember that little picture with things kind of being, juggled in the air, they don't have time. If you know beforehand that they may not be able to give you a recording of your radio interview, then bring something to record your interview with you when you go to the studio. I have a little digital recorder. You can get them at London Drugs or other electronic stores. It's a Sony. It costs $100. I've had it for like 10 years. It's fabulous. It's tiny. It runs on batteries, and I never have to plug it in. So I never run out of juice. I never run around asking people for an iPhone charger. Whereas, to believe it or not, there have been reporters using iPhones to record things, running around trying to find chargers. And how are you going to record it? Anyway, I use a tiny digital recorder, very simple. You can get this copy, get a copy of the radio or TV interview. Even if the TV interview, you can only do the audio because you bring in a little audio recorder. That's better than nothing. And then you can post it in a variety of media, which we'll talk about in a minute. If you're doing an interview on the phone, generally for newspaper or magazine, at the end of the interview, before whoever talks to you gets off the phone, you ask them, how do I get a copy of the PDF of this page? How do I get a copy of the magazine? Now, obviously, if it's online, you don't have to worry about that, like if it's just an online magazine. But if it's something like BC Business and you want to get that page with your photo and the content and put it up on your website, you need your own PDF. And in order to get that, you have to ask for it beforehand, and make sure you ask for it before you lose contact with people. The reporter may say to you they're not going to have time, or they'll try to get it to you, but ideally you want to try and connect with an art director or a production manager. They are usually the people who will be able to get you copies. If you're doing a Zoom interview like this, ask the host if you can record to your computer. And a phone interview, put your speaker if your entire interview is being done on the phone and that's what's going to be posted on, a media outlet's website, then put your phone on speaker, take a digital recorder and hit record. Just record the two of you talking. There are a variety of other ways to record yourself talking on the phone, which I'm not going to get into now. If you're interested in knowing that, you can just email me. What do you do once you've received the coverage? So, media page. Number one, do you have a media page? This is a page dedicated for access to the media. So if you were to email me and say, hey, I'd like to be on your TV show, I would say, okay, great. Where else have you been? And what's your company about? And where can I find your bio? And where can I get some more background or blogs? Or I want to be able to send, you want to be able to send me to a media page that has everything all together. You might have all that information on your website already, but I don't want to click around to 10 different pages. So a media page. And I go into this in my course, by the way. These are all these things that I've gone into so far. I delve into, each one gets a separate module in my course. So when I go into this in my course, I explain exactly the layout of a media page and what the content should be and the reason for it. And this is where you would put any media coverage that you get. Any marketing material you put out, whether it's physical or online, social media, of course. See if there are other channels that you are connected with that would be willing to share your material if it's an advantage to their audience. So if you are doing an interview that is about customer resource management, you could go to any Facebook group that deals with entrepreneurship or business and ask the owner of the group, would they be interested in posting your recording? Because you're giving value to their audience. And then you get more publicity, they get content, their audience gets the tips that you have. So think about cross promotion to other channels. Use the media coverage that you have every time you reach out to connect with conferences that might be looking for speakers or affiliates or other business people looking for joint ventures. Remind people that you've been in the media. You don't have to list every single link that you have, but just even putting the 1 or 2 logos at the bottom of your signature line on your email, as seen in, can make a difference as to whether or not people want to work with you or put you in as a speaker in their lineup. Demonstrating credibility. Other media outlets will be very fascinated to know where you've been already because it demonstrates to them your credibility. So if you remember when I said, what do you put in your email? You need to demonstrate your credibility. If I, as an editor, know that you've already been in another newspaper, magazine, TV show, or what have you, assuming it's not a conflict with my audience, I will feel more comfortable putting you into my media outlet as well because somebody else has already demonstrated that you are the go-to expert. So I don't feel like I'm the first one taking a chance on you. So it's really important. That's why I said, again, try and even get some small media coverage because at least small media coverage is better than not having any if you're going to the bigger media outlets. And don't forget to post your logos everywhere. Stick them on your hat, put them on your put them on the back of your laptop so everywhere you go, people will know that you've been in the media. So here's a case study I have with going back to Barry Sampson I mentioned earlier. He was the one who had the quote about credibility. His event was called the Depression Confessions, and he was aiming to get about 100 people out to listen to it on a live broadcast or to come in person. It was in December, just between Christmas and New Year, so it was a really bad time. But the whole point of the event was to deal with depression during Christmas, so it was very relevant to have at that time. So he had started on his own, kind of haphazardly reaching out to different media and was really not focused. So we focused him on the media outlets that was going to get him the most response in the short amount of time, because we only had 3 weeks actually, or 4 weeks before we started doing this. changed the subject line, made it much more relevant to the time period. So he had said something generic about an event coming to Vancouver, whereas we changed it to reflect depression during Christmas holidays. So if you remember, I repeated over and over again, can you make something very timely? If somebody, a decision maker, sees in the subject line the word Christmas holidays, they know there's a limited time that they can run this story. Limited time that they can interview him. They know that after a few weeks it's going to be a dead story. So it makes them kind of wake up. We restructured the content of the press release. That was just a matter of, what I saw to be have the most priority. And we created and worked on a follow-up strategy for the pitches that he had already done. So in our responses, CBC Television put him on Our Vancouver, CBC Radio put him on North by Northwest, and Roundhouse Radio gave him 2 interviews. We focused on broadcast because it's the quickest turnaround. Because broadcast, yes, their shows are usually complete 2 or 3 days in advance, but sometimes they can move people, and very, very often they can get you on their show within a week. Whereas a magazine, newspaper, those will take longer lead times. And again, I'm sorry, I don't have the time to go into all of that on the presentation today, but I do go into that in my course. I go into all the different lead times for different media outlets. So here's the example of what he got. There he is with another student of mine, actually Candace Platter. By the way, when you become a student, you get a lot of leverage just from me because I have access to a lot of people in the community and a lot of media outlets. And Barry had connected with CBC Television. And then I ran into Candace at an event and I realized that she and Barry had some synchronicity. So I put her in touch with the media campaign, and then she ended up on television as well. So you never know where your connections will lead to. And the beauty about this is a link on CBC, and Barry can now include this link in all his media outreach. And what he does is whenever he puts an email out, he actually is very explicit saying, I have already been interviewed with CBC. And it works for him because he's moving from province to province. So he did this in Vancouver. He's going to be doing one in Edmonton. And so there's no conflict between the coverage of CBC in one place and a media outlet in another. So it gives him a lot of credibility to be able to do this. His results, more than 500 people either came to the event or watched the live stream. And now reporters are contacting me. And by that, he means they're reaching out to him. He doesn't have to reach out to them. He's having his phone ring because people are seeing him now in the media. In fact, a journalist in Alberta saw him on the broadcast and reached out to him when he found out that Barry was doing an event in Alberta. So great example of a great campaign. It was short, but it got some really good results and is now growing upon itself. So my big question, and probably something you ask yourself very often, when you join a course or take a learning or even join this webinar, you have an interest in this. You know that this is something that can help you in your business. You know what it is. I mean, you see magazines, you watch television, you listen to radio. It's not like it's foreign to you. If you've ever taken an airplane flight anywhere, you've probably seen the store that has the wall of magazines and wondered, well, look, there's so many magazines out there. Can't I get into one? So what stops you? Most of the people I've spoken to say they don't know where to start, or it just seems too complicated. Maybe because they don't know the order in which they have to do things. Then there's a lack of belief. So if you don't think that you can do it yourself, and this is twofold. One, sometimes people just say, I don't have the time, and I have a solution for that. In my course, I explain very precisely how to arrange this so it's only literally a few hours a month. Once you get going, it's a few hours a month. In the beginning, there might be more time put into it because there's a learning curve. but I want to make sure you're not spending hours every day doing this. There's no point because you're not going to do it. A lot of people don't reach out to media because they don't think they have a story, or they have that feeling like, who would listen to me? In some cases, people don't have a step-by-step system. And in almost all cases, people realize they don't have the guidance. They don't have somebody who's actually taking them step-by-step through the process. So I suggest that you actually let a seasoned editor walk you through the process of media outreach. And this is why I developed the Media Mastery System. I don't want to be a PR company that charges $3,000-$4,000 retainer every month for 6 months. That's what's out there these days. If people want to get PR, they think the only way to do it is to fork over thousands and thousands of dollars. And it's completely not true. All you need is the right system to go through so that you can see what comes first, what comes second, what comes third. And believe me, none of this is brain surgery. Really, it isn't. If you can do social media, you can do this, and it'll take you less time. So first of all, we have live online training. I have classes that go every week. We go about an hour, hour and a quarter, and then I stay for all the questions people have. You have homework at the end of every session, and I follow up and make sure if I don't see homework posted or sent to me, I follow up to make sure it's done before the next class. It's got to be done before the next class, otherwise you're not going to succeed in the program. I'm going to be overseeing all your work. I do not want anybody to send anything out to a media outlet before I've seen it. Because as well as you might follow in class, when you put something down in the email, there might be little things that you're doing you're not aware of. I want to get in there so I can make sure that you learn the proper way. I provide media pitch templates and samples that are already filled out. So all you have to do is change the name of the company and change the product or service. It's practically written for you. And I think I'm up to 7 or 8 different styles of media pitches, so that no matter what you're trying to pitch, whether it's a product, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a new shoe, whether it's a new hairstyle, whatever it is, we will have the right media pitch for you. And the private Facebook support group. This has been invaluable. As soon as you are a client or a course member, you get into that group. It's closed, and I post tips for media outreach. I post if people are looking to interview from media. If they're looking for people to interview, I post it in there. Anything that can help you on your journey. If I get new editorial contacts or new content calendars, I'll let people know. And I post in that string, I post every time I have a course, the time and link to the class. So if you're part of my course, you can attend all the courses in the future. So even after you graduate one, you can come back, and you can always go into that Facebook group and get access to the program. And of course, it's made up of people who have taken my course and been clients. So any questions that you have anytime, just post it in the group and you're guaranteed to get an answer. So here are the packages that I have. Now, I promised I'm not selling online, and there's no place for you to buy this right now. I do not want you to jump in and buy it before we've had a chance to talk. So I would prefer that if you're interested in really being serious about your media outreach, you consider scheduling a 45-minute conversation with me. We're going to talk about these packages. The gold package that I have is the 6-week online course. You get access to all the recordings and all the related material that comes with the course. Access to me as the editor, my opinion, my oversight, the membership in Facebook group, unlimited access to any of my future Media Mastery courses. You could drop in anytime. So if you do happen to miss a class, you can always make it up later. And this price, the gold package, includes 6 one-on-one sessions, private sessions with me. You could do that before, during, or after the course. It's really helpful for a lot of people who find they just want that little bit of extra hand-holding in addition to the classroom. If you feel, no, it's okay, Classroom is all you need, especially since you're going to be able to email me as much as you want while the course is going on, that's $9.97. So if this is something you might consider, just have a conversation with me. I am going to type the link into this chat box so you can go there right away and just set up to see, you know, are we a good fit? Is this course going to make a difference to you? You know, I don't want you taking something again and having it sit on the shelf, or you don't show up, or you show up and you're not really there. I want to work with people who are gung-ho about this. You know that this is something that can really make a difference for your business. It can get you leads. It can build your credibility. It can, you know, augment your brand. You know already what it does. All we need to do is see if the schedule works for you. So as I mentioned, oh, sorry, there it is again. That's the wrong slide. Your gift. So thank you for staying until the end here, the bitter end. I have for you the 7 videos I mentioned earlier in the presentation, how to create a media ready pitch. Just go to bit.ly 7 videos, and I will put that into the chat box as well. And you will see that there's actually a password for each video, but the password is given right on the page. So it's not like you have to email me for the password. It's just password protected because that's the way they were created. So I want to go into Q&A now. If you want to just unmute yourself, and I'll leave this up for a few minutes so you can make sure you get that bit.ly link. Don't worry about, you know, when we get onto the phone together, by the way, this isn't about me pushing a hard sell on you. I want to know a little bit about what you do. We're going to talk about a little bit about the strategy, like what you would need to get yourself into the media outlets that you're looking for, and whether or not you can achieve that in 54 days or less. And by the way, if you have been wondering, the 54 days or less has to do with the amount of time that it usually takes once you start implementing the step-by-step program, how long before you get your first response from media and actually get coverage in the media. Now, I'm not guaranteeing every media outlet that you want, but 54 days is the average. So I'm going to stop share for now and go into the Q&A questions.